So now let's talk about syntax and styling within programming languages. So the most important thing is to learn syntax. So what syntax means is this is basically how the program has to be written for whatever programming language you're using, right? So there's things such as what are called delimiters, and basically what delimiters are is it tells you where essentially a line or a block of code stops. So if you're using a language such as PHP or SQL, structured query language, they have the delimiter of a semicolon. So if you don't use semicolons, your code is simply not going to work. If you're using Python, the way you differentiate code blocks is through indentations, either spaces or tabs. We'll talk about that in a minute, but basically that's how you're able to show where there are specific blocks of code. If you do not reuse indentations right, your code simply will not function. So when we're talking about syntax, this is the language that you need to use for your code to even function at all. But then past that, we get to styling. And so styling is where you get to the problem in some programming languages of what is called spaghetti code, where you can have code that works perfectly well, functions perfectly well. It will function perfectly well for the next 500 years. There's nothing technically wrong with the code. The issue is it is impossible to read and impossible to maintain. So with Python, right? Python is a programming language. It is designed to be readable, right? So using those indentations in order to differentiate code blocks, one of the things with Python is on its own, simply with how the syntax was designed, it is relatively easy to read, even if the coder who created it created a bit of a mess, right? Just simply by design. The issue is with other languages though, such as JavaScript or PHP, is how they were designed with delimiters and such. You can just create an entire mess. You could create just a massive amount of code in one single line. Right? So you could use PHP and you could put everything literally in one single line that just goes from here to infinity. And as long as you put the semicolons in there properly, as long as you did all the syntax right, it'll run fine. It's just going to be miserable to maintain. Or, beyond that, you can just have this mush of code where you just look at these blocks of code, and it's very hard to understand where one block of code ends, and the next block of code begins, and basically how everything interacts with each other. And so that's the issue that you get into with spaghetti code, is basically where you have technically functional code. It's just insane, just horrible to try to read. And that's where we come to styling. And so what styling is beyond the syntax, is basically how do you write the code so that it's readable to other people. Now there's different styling principles out there. So in Python, so again, we use Python a lot for Silicon Dojo, there's something called this PEP 8 styling standard. And so that is a standard for how you're supposed to style your Python code in order to make it more readable. When you go to an organization or company, when you get hired, they may have their own styling policies. Basically, the idea of this is how we write our code in order to make it more readable for people, again, to make it easier to maintain. So let's go over to the computer for a second. I'll just kind of show you the difference between the syntax and the styling. So here we are at VS Code. Let me see. Let me create a list. So this is going to be in a programming language called Python, right? Don't worry too much about the language itself. I just want to give you that idea between syntax and styling. So I'm going to be creating something called a list here, and this list basically is able to contain multiple values. So let's say I'm doing names. So Bob and Tim and let's say Sue, right? So I'm just sitting here and I'm just creating all these names that will be going, in this list here, right? And so this is how I can create a list, and this syntax is fine. The issue is what happens if each one of these values is really long, right? And so it starts running on somewhere. So there's that, and there's that, and there's that, and there's that. right? So technically, this is fine. So it's using word wrap to keep everything on the screen, but it starts to get a little ugly. So from a syntax standpoint, this is perfectly fine. From a styling standpoint, this becomes an issue because it just becomes a little bit difficult to be able to read. So what I can do is within the Python language, I can actually put each of these values onto its own line, so that when somebody comes and they're looking at this particular script, they can see, okay, this is my list. The value at index 0 is this, the value at index 1 is this, index 2 is this, and index 3 is this, right? The styling just makes it easier to read. The same is true with Python with these things called indentations. So let's say name equals Bob. So let's say I want to do an if statement on whether the name is Bob. So if name equals Bob, do something, right? So basically what we're talking about with spaces here is in if statements, in loop statements, or in loops, that type of thing. You start by basically opening it up, and then underneath you would then either use a tab or you could use a space to say what the additional basically things that should happen in that code block are. So if name equals Bob, you can print hello Bob, right? And basically, that's basically what an if statement looks like. So this will work fine, right? So this is syntax that will work fine. Interestingly enough, if you simply do a space, a single space, it will work fine. And if you do 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, this will both work fine and is up to the styling standard. Now, why 4 spaces is considered better than a tab in the Python world is because what's interesting is a space always has the same value regardless of the operating system. So if you go to the Mac operating system or Linux or Windows, a space is a space is a space is a space. You cannot change the size of a space. What's curious about tabs is different operating systems will actually adjust the size of a tab. So the space a tab takes up may be different with different operating systems or with different configurations. So although 4 spaces appears to take up the same amount of space as a single tab, how operating systems deal with tabs is different than spaces. So you can use a tab in the Python world, but for PEP 8 standards, you're actually supposed to use 4 spaces. And that's the kind of thing that you get into, and again, it becomes the difference between syntax and styling, and how this can all get to be a bit of a mess if you have people not thinking about the styling along with the syntax. So there you go. That gives you a basic idea of what we're talking about here. Again, remember, as a technology professional, it is not simply about designing systems that you can manage and maintain. It's about designing systems that the next person and the next person and the next person can manage and maintain. So let's say you create some code and the code works great. You did a technically wonderful job with the code, works perfect for the next 5 years, right? You're with this company, you bounce off to another company, you become CIO somewhere, life is going great, 5 or 6 years from now, and then you have some poor, coder that has to sit down and update your code for some reason. Then API call has changed, or they want to add a little bit of functionality to whatever you created so many years ago. Imagine them opening up your script, and what are they going to see? Are they going to see a script that is relatively easy to read, so they can grab a cup of coffee, figure out what's going on, and then make the modifications as they need to? Or are they going to open up the script and it's going to be a disaster? Are they just going to be looking at just so much text, just text, text? that does something. They're not really sure what it does or why it does what it does, but it definitely, it's done something for the past 6 years, right? That's the kind of thing that you need to be thinking about. And so there are, again, these styling standards that are out there. Like with Python, it's called PEP 8. JavaScript has their own standards, that type of deal. So one of the things is you should look at the different styling standards, and then with your organization, you may have legacy styling standards that have just that were just created a number of years ago, and that's just how everybody in the company does things. Again, if you have a team of 10 people, that's one of the things to think about. Like with coding, there's this idea that it's just you. It's just you in your little box, and that's it. Again, that's not how coding is. That's how coding was 25 years ago. Now, a lot of coding is done on teams, so it's not even about maintaining code, years from now. It's about, you may have 5 people on your team now. So as you're writing code and your peers are writing code and you're all integrating that into whatever you're deploying, making sure everybody's writing code basically in the same way, so that when you're looking at your teammates' code or they're looking at your code to verify things are working properly, the easier it is for them to be able to read, the less likely it is that there's going to be some catastrophic mistake that's going to cause everybody a lot of problems. So that's the difference between syntax and styling and why it's so important.